Hey guys, tonight we step softly into a garden that doesn't bloom from dirt alone, but from math, heat, patience, and something else almost magical. Wind. Not the violent gusts of storms or the dry sighs of deserts, but an intentional breeze crafted, bent, shaped like a whisper between stones. We're in ancient Persia, and someone 1,000 years ago already knew what your ceiling fan still hasn't figured out. Picture this. You're not indoors, not quite outdoors either. You're walking through a stone corridor open to the sky, hedged by pomegranate trees and lined with tiles cool underfoot. And the air? It doesn't just move. It glides, guided by invisible choices made by people who built this space with wind in mind. You're about to learn how they did it. Just don't expect to survive the heat if they hadn't. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening in from a hidden garden of your own, drop your location and local time down in the comments. I'd love to know how the air feels where you are. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You duck beneath a low archway. It's carved from stone so pale it reflects the faint moonlight like polished pearl. The scent of mint rises faintly from somewhere, and the first thing you notice before the greenery, before the tiles, is the air. It's cool. It's moving. Not a breeze from the heavens, but from the house itself. You tilt your face upward and follow it. A soft draft is spilling down from a tall rectangular shaft set into the wall. A wind catcher, a badger. Now to the untrained eye, it just looks like an open window, but step into its line and you'll feel the genius of it. These were vertical shafts, hollow and deliberate, placed above the roofline like stone sails. They'd trap the prevailing wind and funnel it down into rooms, across water channels, or into underground spaces where heat went to die. Imagine building a whole house around the idea that your air should be cooler before you sweat. That's Persian engineering. Historians still argue whether the badger was invented for comfort or ritual purity, but either way, its function is timeless. Long before Newton named motion or thermodynamics got its first formula, these architects were manipulating invisible forces with total fluency. And then there's the brickwork. Not just baked clay blocks, but textured, angled surfaces that play with turbulence like musicians plucking strings. The walls don't just hold up the roof, they channel air. A sloped brick might direct a breeze around a corner. A perforated clay panel might diffuse heat like a sieve for sunlight. You start seeing the patterns, not just for decoration, but design, like crop rows for the wind. You pass a small fountain, barely taller than your knees. Its water is still, but the sound echoes gently under a vaulted canopy. That vault, not random. It's placed to catch sound and air, to pull motion toward you like a cool hush wrapping your shoulders. You keep walking. The path is lined with trees, but not randomly. You begin to notice that certain trees appear where the air moves differently. Taller ones on the north edge, shorter citrus near the center. One fig tree leans slightly to the side, like it knows which way the breeze is supposed to go. There's no electricity, no fans, no thermometer. But the garden feels 10 degrees cooler than the world outside, and not just from shade. It's the structure, the layout, the choices. You lean against a plastered wall etched with simple geometric flowers. Your palm cools immediately. It's not just the material, it's the thickness. Thick walls, deep-set windows, and narrow doorways, each a small rebellion against the desert's glare. Persian homes weren't just insulated. They were tuned like flutes to harmonize with air movement. And all of this, centuries old, crafted before science had words for convection, conduction, or passive cooling. Yet here it is, perfectly functional. You take a step and pause. A faint breeze hits your ankle, low and constant as though the floor exhales. Beneath you, somewhere under this tiled walkway, a kanat might run, an underground water channel engineered to move downhill with a nearly supernatural precision. Water flows, air follows, that's the trick. And the builders knew this. They didn't guess where to put windows. They measured stars. They didn't guess when to open a vent. They watched ants and leaves. They designed their cities so that streets aligned with seasonal winds. Their architecture wasn't trial and error. It was observation turned to blueprint. You crouch beside a small opening carved at the base of a wall. A vent, maybe. It's no taller than your shin and leads nowhere you can see. But hold your hand over it, and air moves. Not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily. It carries with it a dry scent somewhere between clay and rose petals. Probably both. One scholar wrote that Persian gardens were the earth made obedient. Grids of water, wind, and trees that allowed a human to dwell in peace. Another called them the blueprint for paradise. That sounds dramatic until you sit in one. You rise slowly. You're not in a palace. You're not in a desert shack either. You're in a place that blends engineering with elegance so subtly it almost hides the brilliance. Nothing brags here. Not the fountains, not the breeze, not the walls. They do what they do, and they do it beautifully. And just as you're about to step into the next courtyard, the wind changes. Slightly. It smells faintly of pomegranate. Not coincidence. The tree is planted near a moisture channel. It thrives. It perfumes the wind. And you realize you're walking through a machine. One built from dirt, leaf, and wind. A system so old it predates explanation. And so effective it rarely needed one. You duck beneath another archway, this one narrower, shaped more like an eyebrow raised in quiet calculation. The moment you pass through, the air shifts. It's still moving, but gentler now, like it's been filtered through velvet. You're standing in a side chamber, a hauskane, a place designed not just to be cool, but to feel like water should be whispering around your feet. And here it is. A shallow octagonal pool at the center, its edges tiled in turquoise and lapis colors, like a jewel resting in the ribs of the room. It's not decorative. Well, not just decorative. It's the air's best friend. In Persian design, moving water isn't only a luxury. It's functional air conditioning. It chills the space without plugs, without wires, without so much as a spinning blade. The breeze from the wind catcher above is drawn downward. As it brushes the surface of the pool, it cools, then curls through the corridors, sliding over carpets and ankles like silk made of breath. Historians still argue whether the pool's shape, a perfect octagon in many homes, was for cooling efficiency or religious symbolism. Either way, you can feel it working. You sit beside it now, trailing one finger along its edge. The water isn't deep, barely enough to cover your knuckles, but it's cold. And it smells faintly of lime and clay, the scent of something that's been alive for centuries but doesn't care if you notice. There's a phrase some old gardeners used. Gardens should breathe, not bloom, not flourish, breathe. And this space does. Quietly, constantly. The columns around you have been painted white, not just for beauty but to reflect light, to cool the stone. Nothing here is random. Above you the dome arches upward, catching heat like a trap, letting it rise away from you. This is the principle of stratification. Hot air rises. Of course, they didn't call it that. They just noticed that if you build your ceilings high and let air move, you don't sweat as much. You look toward a clay jar resting in the corner. It's half buried in the floor, its rim just peeking above the surface. It's a zir-i-zamin, a subterranean jar designed to store water at a cool, steady temperature. Still water, but not stagnant. Breathing again, just like everything else here. It's all part of the rhythm, and that's the real story tonight. Not just the breeze or the brick, but the rhythm. The way each element joins another like a choir of stone and breath. You step back outside, the transition barely noticeable because the house has no hard edges between indoors and out, just flow. You pass beneath a trellis where grapevines have curled over beams, and again the air cools. The plant isn't just pretty, it's strategic. Vines cool the sunlight, trap dust and sweat moisture into the passing air. One small gust tickles your ear. You follow it with your eyes, watching the path it takes. Around a column, over a stone bench, through a tiled arch. It dances, it's guided. Nothing haphazard about it. And now you enter the garden proper, a sharbak or fourfold garden. This is no backyard. This is a layout so influential that it inspired Mughal India, Islamic Spain, and the manicured lawns of European manners. Its name comes from the cross-shaped layout, 4 quadrants divided by water channels intersecting at a central pool. But this isn't just geometry, it's climate control. The paths allow air to move freely, the water encourages evaporation, and the trees planted with precise spacing shade the ground without blocking the wind. It's a masterclass in microclimates. You take a slow walk along one of these channels. The water murmurs as it moves, not fast, but steady. It carries air with it, cooler air. And suddenly you realize you're sweating less than you were just 5 minutes ago. And you've done nothing but walk into a better designed pocket of the world. You pass a bench carved from marble. It's cold to the touch. Someone knew exactly where to place it. Under a fig tree beside the water in line with the prevailing wind. You sit. A woman in 9th century robes might have sat here. A poet. A child with dusty feet and a stolen pomegranate. They didn't need to understand airflow diagrams or thermodynamics. They just knew how to listen. To stone. To air. And let's talk about those materials for a second. You glance around. Adobe, mud brick, tile, timber, local, breathable, textured materials that don't trap heat like modern concrete does. They don't scream for attention. They just work. Clay walls wick moisture. Bricks radiate coolness at night. Plaster reflects light. If these buildings had skin, they'd be glistening with intelligence. There's a niche in the wall ahead, probably used for a lantern, but its placement, right under a ventilation shaft. Why? So the light flickers gently in the moving air, telling anyone nearby, yes, the wind is still here, Even their architecture signaled air. Quirky detail. They used to scent the breeze on special occasions. Rosewater, citrus, sometimes cinnamon. They'd pour it onto tiles or float petals in the fountains. Not for the nose alone, but to measure the wind. If the scent reached the far side of the garden, the flow was good. If not, something had gone wrong. You let that idea settle. Scent as an anemometer, poetry as architecture. You smile. And just as you start to leave, a cat passes by. Sleek, gray, unfazed. It weaves along the shade line like it's tracing an invisible breeze map. You decide to follow. Smart cat. You trail the cat through a corridor where the air sharpens slightly, like someone's dialed up the cool by 2 degrees. It leads you to another garden enclosure, but this one's different. The space is tighter, more intimate. You're standing in a bagche, a smaller walled garden tucked away like a secret. It smells like jasmine and damp clay. Here's the twist. The breeze you're feeling now isn't just ambient luck. It's been engineered. You look up. Towering above the garden wall is a slim vertical chimney-like structure. A badger or wind catcher. And no, it's not a metaphor. It literally catches wind. Even a whisper of moving air gets scooped into that tower's opening. Inside, a system of channels funnels the air downward, cooling it as it travels past thick mud brick walls and sometimes even underground water channels. Historians still argue whether wind catchers were first invented in Persia or imported from Egypt. But regardless of origin, here in Yazd, they became art. Some have multiple faces to catch wind from any direction. Some have internal veins or damp cloth to further chill the breeze. Some, get this, even have decoy towers to create pressure differences and force circulation. These people weren't playing around. You lean against the wall, pressing your back to the baked surface. It's warm but not hot. The real heat has been drawn upward into the tower, exhaled skyward like a yawn. The trick isn't just catching wind, it's creating a flow, pulling air in and pushing heat out. Like lungs made of clay, you hear a faint rustling. Leaves? No, someone brushing a broom over tile. You peek around the corner and find an elderly gardener clearing petals from a patterned path. His robes barely stir, but you can see the edge of his scarf lift gently. Proof that the wind catcher is still breathing. He sees you and grins, toothless but bright. He doesn't speak. Just gestures toward the corner of the garden, where a small alcove hosts a jug, a cup, and a sprig of mint floating in the water. A makeshift refreshment station cooled by shadow and airflow. You take a sip. It's startlingly cold. The gardener chuckles as though to say, "Impressed yet? You are." But you're also curious because not every garden has a badger. Some rely entirely on what's beneath your feet. You walk on, following a path of crushed limestone that gleams faintly under the sun. It leads you to a building half sunken into the ground. You step down into the shade and immediately feel the shift. The temperature drops. Welcome to the world of the Qanat. These underground aqueducts are among Persia's greatest engineering achievements. They carried water from distant mountains to arid cities like Yazd, flowing along gentle gradients for miles. But here's the secret sauce. As water moves underground, it cools, and when that water passes beneath buildings or vents upward into courtyards, it chills the air above. You're standing over one now. The canot runs maybe 5 meters below you. You can't see it, but you can hear it. A faint gurgle like the earth whispering back. And if you crouch near the floor vent, you can feel it. Air rising. Not strong, but cold. Like the ground itself is exhaling. There's a room nearby used for storage. Clay jars, dried herbs, bolts of fabric, nothing special. But it's always cool. No fans, no magic, just physics before physics had a name. You walk outside again, blinking in the brightness, but it's not as harsh now. You've acclimated. Or maybe the wind is following you. You spot another structure in the distance. A pavilion rising in the middle of a large rectangular garden. It's framed by 4 walkways, each lined with trees and shallow canals. You make your way there, passing over small bridges where fish dart beneath your feet. The pavilion is open on all sides, designed to invite wind, not block it. The roof is high, almost theatrical, its underside painted with constellations and floral spirals. A summer house, yes, but also a perfect wind theater. You sit in the center, legs crossed, as air flows from all 4 directions, merging, calming, twirling around you like invisible silk. A story comes to mind, one of those semi-historical, semi-fanciful tales. A Persian noble had a garden so perfectly designed that birds refused to leave it. They lived there year-round, migrating from tree to tree instead of land to land. Why? Because the air was better, more forgiving, more musical. You laugh quietly. That's either a myth or a very good garden. And the textiles, let's not skip that. You glance around at the draped fabrics hanging from the pavilion edges, swaying slightly. They're not just for shade. These curtains direct airflow. Open one, and the breeze takes a different path. Close another, and you block heat from creeping in. Fabric becomes a valve. You get the feeling that even the birds would consult the drapes before settling down. It's at this moment you realize Persian designers didn't just use wind, they choreographed it. There's a joy in that thought, like the breeze is a guest, not a force. And you, just by walking, are part of its journey. You take a deep breath, and even that feels strategic. You linger in the pavilion longer than you meant to. The wind coaxes you into stillness like an old friend patting your back and whispering, "Stay a while." But curiosity is stronger, and so is the sound of trickling water calling from somewhere deeper within the garden. You rise and start walking again, this time with a question hanging in the air. What's going on underneath all this? Because the real genius of Persian garden design isn't just what you see. It's what you feel, and what you're feeling now, even as the sun sharpens its rays overhead, is coolness rising from the earth. You're standing atop something ancient, the Kanat. Beneath your sandals, a subterranean aqueduct quietly hums along, carrying cold mountain water through the desert like a secret lifeline. These kanats weren't just irrigation marvels. They were built with a sloping precision that let water flow for miles without pumps. But more impressively, they also pulled air with them, creating natural convection currents that could cool buildings and courtyards above. You crouch beside a small opening in the ground covered with a decorative stone grate. Put your hand over it. Feel that? A breeze, slight but unmistakably cool. The temperature difference between the underground tunnel and the dry heat above creates suction, pulling air up through buildings, towers, and even hollow garden walls. It's like the earth itself is exhaling. Historians still argue whether this dual use of colonnades, water plus passive air conditioning, was deliberate from the beginning or discovered by happy accident. But either way, it worked, and it still does in some places centuries later. You walk along a gently descending path lined with date palms and sour orange trees. The plants here are arranged with intent, not just for beauty or shade, but to guide the wind. Trees are spaced to slow it, bushes to stir it, and walls to shape it. You're in a wind tuning chamber disguised as a garden. The path leads you to a small domed building, half above ground, half below. You duck through the doorway into darkness that feels like a sigh. Inside, the air is several degrees cooler. Clay jars line the walls, and in the middle, a shallow pool glimmers like a held breath. This is a yakchal, an ancient Persian ice pit. It's part fridge, part air catcher, part storage room. During winter, ice harvested from nearby mountains was stored inside, insulated by thick walls made of a special heat-resistant mortar called sarouj. But even in summer, the yakchal remained cool thanks to, you guessed it, wind and water. The structure itself is shaped like a cone to minimize surface area exposed to heat, and it often connects to colonnades to allow cooled air to rise gently through it. You press your hand to the inner wall, cold, dry. It's like the building is still whispering winter. You sit down beside the pool and listen to the distant echoes of dripping water. A story surfaces, a fringe tale admittedly, about how Persian engineers could trap wind inside these structures. One version even claims they could store air like water, releasing it later. Impossible, maybe. But in this cool chamber surrounded by ancient math and mud brick, it doesn't sound so far-fetched. A soft creak behind you. You turn to see a panel in the wall slowly open. It reveals a channel, a shadowy tunnel where air flows in a tight current. Your guide from earlier, the old gardener, leans in. He doesn't speak, just lifts an eyebrow and nods toward the opening. An invitation. You follow. The tunnel is low and slightly damp, lit by small slits above that allow streaks of dusty sunlight to sneak in. The air smells of stone, wet clay, and something sweet. Rosewater, maybe, or memories. It's the inside of the garden, the bones beneath the flesh. The tunnel curves gently, then opens upward. You climb a short stairwell and emerge behind a carved wooden screen. On the other side, another garden, bigger, louder somehow, with taller trees and a central fountain spraying arcs of water into the air. But what catches your eye is the shape of the fountain's basin. Long and narrow, a rectangle running east to west. That's no accident. It's aligned to the prevailing summer winds. As water evaporates from the surface, it cools the air above it, which the wind then carries through the garden. It's nature's own swamp cooler, dressed up like a royal feature. You sit on the edge, splash your face, and let your eyes wander. Children once played here. Merchants once bartered for shade. Poets once leaned against these same tiles, composing couplets about wind that sounded like silk and gardens that felt like forgiveness. These weren't just places to grow things, they were places to breathe, and now so are you. You close your eyes for a moment and just sit in it, in the hum of still water, the brush of air against your cheek, and the almost audible rhythm of design that makes everything feel calm, intentional, wise. You lean back against the basin and let the water drip from your fingertips, tracing lazy arcs in the warm air. The sun is still out, blazing really, but something's different. You're not baking under it. You're sheltered, swaddled in something cooler than shade alone. You look up. A canopy of branches stretches overhead. Pomegranate, fig, citrus, woven together so tightly they form a natural dome. But it's not just the trees that are keeping you cool. It's where they are, why they are, and what they're doing. You shift your gaze to the structure beside the trees. A colonnade of stone pillars with latticework that lets light dance in, not flood. And next to that, a low wall, not quite solid, not quite air. Everything here is arranged just so, like set pieces in a play directed by the wind itself. Because shade in a Persian garden isn't just an accident of height or plant growth. It's a design element deployed with the precision of a master strategist. You don't just plant a tree because it looks nice. You place it where it will cool the stones beneath it at noon, soften the light at sunset, and still let the breeze slither through at dusk. You walk a little farther and notice how the shadows don't fall randomly. They move like dancers through the day, one partner handing off to the next. A column's edge will shield a bench at precisely the hour it's most needed. A vine trellis casts stripes of shadow over a path, cooling your feet without plunging you into darkness. Someone planned this. Someone knew. Historians still argue whether these microclimates were mapped out using intuition, oral tradition, or empirical testing over centuries. Some say early Persian garden designers tracked solar patterns, prevailing winds, and even regional soil temperatures before laying a single stone. Others claim it was more poetic than precise, a feeling passed from hand to hand. But the result? It's poetry you can sit in. You pause under a particularly dense tree, likely a mulberry, and glance at the ground. There's a smooth stone bench built into the wall, but it's angled oddly, not facing the fountain or the path, facing the breeze. You sit. The air rushes lightly across your neck like a silk scarf. The bench isn't for conversation or contemplation. It's for cooling down. Now that you're looking for them, these small design tricks pop out everywhere. The corner curves in the wall that deflect hot gusts upward. The way tall shrubs are placed behind shorter ones to keep both alive without choking the air. Even the gravel beneath your feet. It crunches, yes, but it also reflects less heat than brick and drains water away quickly, leaving the ground dry and cool. You remember that wind catcher from earlier? It isn't working alone. It partners with every corner of this place. Each wall has a job. Each bush has a role. Even the shade has structure. You peek behind a screen wall and find a hidden alcove, a sort of pocket garden within the garden. It's smaller, cozier, and filled with herbs, mint, basil, lavender. The scent hits you before the wind does. But both arrive. This isn't just a culinary side project. It's an olfactory one. Smell cools the mind when the air can't quite reach the body. And here, tucked behind high walls and tall trees, you realize something quietly powerful. These shaded areas aren't about blocking the sun, they're about sculpting the air. You're not just walking through a garden, you're inside a living, breathing wind machine. There's a strange joke that floats into your mind, something about a garden designer and a physicist walking into a bar. Only the garden designer knows how to chill the drinks using only pomegranates and limestone. Not your best material, but the point stands. You hear laughter, not yours. From another part of the garden, someone else is enjoying the trick of coolness conjured from clay and leaf. You can't see them, but the sound travels perfectly, as if channeled along some secret acoustic line. Sound behaves differently in these spaces too. The same spatial awareness that shapes airflow often shapes sound flow. A fringe theory pops into your head, whispered by a tour guide once, that some Persian garden layouts were modeled after musical scales, that the spacing between walls and pools wasn't just for shade or scent, but for harmony. Literal acoustic tuning. Real, unlikely. But you can't help but notice how peaceful this place sounds. You wander again, slower now, tracking the sun's descent and the garden's subtle shift in mood. What had been bright becomes dappled. What was warm is now forgiving. The shadows lengthen like yawns stretching across marble. It's as if the whole place knows the day is exhaling. You take one last stroll along a side path and notice the simplest trick of all. Tall trees planted in rows not for fruit or flower, but for direction, like a breeze runway. They guide the wind through, cooling not just the garden, but the people within it. It's nature choreographed, wind rehearsed. And you're the lucky soul who got a ticket to the show. You stand just past the last archway and find yourself staring at something that looks deceptively wild. Pomegranate shrubs tangling with jasmine, fig trees slouched like old storytellers, and neat rows of herbs curling up from the soil like green breath. But there's nothing random about this. This garden is playing 4D chess with the wind. You step forward and a breeze greets you. Not just any breeze, but one that seems to know where you've been and where you're headed. It tugs your sleeve, lifts the edge of your scarf, then slides past your ear as if whispering, "This way." You follow. Of course you do. Because in a Persian garden, the plants are not just for food or fragrance. They're air architects. The pomegranate tree, compact, dense, low to the ground, acts like a hedge that nudges wind sideways. Fig leaves, wide and rubbery, ripple like sails and help redistribute gusts. Citrus trees with their waxy leaves and fragrant blossoms do double duty, cooling the air and scenting it, like nature's own essential oil diffuser. Historians still argue whether these planting strategies were based on trial and error wisdom, oral blueprints passed from generation to generation, or something more deliberate, an early form of botanical engineering. But you can't deny the results. You kneel beside a bush of basil, its scent sharper than the others. You didn't need to see the wind pass to know it was here. You smelled it arrive. There's a pattern in this garden. Wind enters narrow, speeds up, passes fragrant herbs, and slows in open areas where denser foliage cools it. The plants are choreographed like dancers who know exactly when to bow. And here's a thought. What if they were meant to be dancers? There's an old Persian belief that wind, like spirit, responds to beauty. So gardens weren't just practical, they were seductive, not for humans, but for the elements. You don't force the wind, you invite it. You make it feel welcome. You glance down the alley of plane trees and notice how the taller ones are flanked by shorter ones. Not for aesthetics, well, also for aesthetics, but mainly for graduated cooling. The air descending from the tallest tree gets a buffer zone before hitting ground level. Imagine bumpers on a bowling lane, except they're fig branches and you're the bowling ball. Even the soil is involved. Darker soil absorbs more heat, but mix in pale gravel or crushed marble. It reflects light upward, cools the surface. You run your fingers through a patch of soil at the garden's edge and find tiny white stones mixed in. Someone put them there for a reason. Not for decoration, for thermodynamics. You stand again and let your eyes wander. Notice how no two trees fight for space. Vines climb up where shrubs spread out. Bushes bulge where tree canopies recede. It's a game of volume and void. Each plant fills only what it needs, leaving airspace for wind to breathe. You pause by a pair of olive trees and spot something unexpected. A small pile of clay tiles leaned against the base. Odd place for construction leftovers. Or maybe not. A whisper of air curls past you, and the tiles rattle gently like a wind chime with stage fright. Ah, not leftovers, instruments. In some gardens, ceramic shapes were used as rudimentary air meters. Not scientific, not precise, but useful. If the tiles sang, the wind was good. If they didn't, something needed adjusting. Maybe a gate closed, a tree pruned, or a fountain opened. You smile. It's so human, really. Using sound to manage wind like tuning an invisible violin. One of the quirkiest things you notice is the layout of garden beds. They're not just rectangular plots. Some are triangular, curved, or even spiral-shaped. Why? A fringe theory suggests that airflow is smoother when directed along curved edges rather than sharp corners. The wind glides instead of colliding. You can't help but think of Formula One racetracks, built for speed but also for safety. Same principle, different century. Your steps bring you to a low wall, over which you spot a narrow courtyard lined with grapevines. The air here is thick, not stagnant, just dense, moist, heavy with the scent of growth. It's the opposite of breezy, but that's the point. Some plants want this. Tomatoes, melons, beans, heat lovers, so they're placed where airflow slows. The garden provides for them too. Everything, it seems, is where it wants to be, and where it helps something else. The lemon tree cools the bench. The mint masks the compost. The low jasmine bush slows the breeze just enough for the roses to enjoy it. It's less a hierarchy than a whispering council. And now you notice your own breathing has changed. Slower, deeper. As if the garden has cooled you down from the inside out. The trick, of course, isn't just which plants were used, but how they were arranged. The Persian garden wasn't a checklist of species, it was a choreography of air, shadow, and scent. You weren't just designing a landscape, you were designing experience. A final detail catches your eye. A narrow arch of vines that forms a living tunnel. As you walk through it, the breeze narrows too. Faster, cooler, funneled. It kisses your neck, slides down your arms, and vanishes before you reach the exit. You turn back, wanting it again. The plant tunnel doesn't care. It's already working on the next traveler. You grin. You've been outplayed by shrubs. You drift now toward the western edge of the garden, where the breeze changes its tone. Not gone, not silent, just more respectful. Here the architecture begins to assert itself. Stone pavilions with latticework walls. Low platforms with cushions. Shade-heavy corners that feel more like whispered secrets than places to sit. And you realize we've moved from dancing with plants to negotiating with buildings. Because Persian garden designers didn't just rely on nature. They partnered with geometry, architecture, and yes, wind itself to create miniature climates, what modern engineers might call microclimates. Except these were built long before climate had a Latin root. Take that latticework panel just ahead. To your modern eyes, it might seem decorative, lovely patterns cut into clay or wood. But peer through it while standing in the right place and you'll feel it. The breeze is shaped, not blocked, not random, filtered. Historians still argue whether these jolly-style screens were developed purely for aesthetics or evolved alongside a deep, intuitive understanding of airflow. But one thing's clear, they work. The openings are just small enough to break up harsh wind, but wide enough to let soft air pass. And they cast the kind of shadow that makes light feel like lace. You sit beneath one now. The wall behind you is still warm from the sun, but the air in front is crisp. It's like reclining inside a paradox, a cool pocket that shouldn't exist in this dry heat, but does. And over there, look, a thick adobe wall painted with pale earth tones. No windows, just a single wooden door and a low vent carved like a cat's eye near the base. It's a badger, or wind catcher. A phrase that sounds like something from a fantasy novel but is real, ancient, and deliciously clever. The badger rises like a small tower from the roof, open at the top in one or more directions. When the wind blows, it dives into those openings, zips down the internal shaft, and floods the room below with cooler air. Sometimes it even passes over a pool of water to lower the temperature further. You'd call that evaporative cooling. The Persians called it Tuesday. Some were simple, just a duct in a hole. Others had flaps, vanes, even ceramic inserts to guide the air more precisely. There are badgers in Yazd and Kashan still in use today. And they work. Without wires, without fans, just gravity, temperature, and design. You step closer and place your palm near the vent. The air isn't just cool, it's moving. Gently, like someone breathing nearby. Not bad for a piece of architecture that predates most European castles. Of course, not every structure was built to welcome the wind. Some were designed to avoid it. Kitchens, for example, were usually placed where wind wouldn't stir up flames or ash. The walls would be thicker, corners tighter. Even the orientation mattered. Buildings faced away from harsh summer gusts, but toward the ones that came scented with water. And then there were domes. Ah, domes. You see one now, peeking above the garden wall like a sleepy tortoise. Painted, tiled, or left bare. Each dome is more than decorative. Its curved shape encourages air to circulate inside naturally, pushing hot air upward and drawing cool air down, like a living lung. You've never seen a roof that breathes before, but now you have. Here's a fringe theory for your midnight thoughts. Some scholars think Persian domes were tuned to resonate at certain frequencies, that the wind flowing through them produced low, barely audible tones meant to soothe the mind or lull the body into sleep. Science hasn't proven it, of course, but wouldn't it be perfect? You wander toward the center of the complex again, where a wide veranda waits like an open palm. Here, the architecture and nature blur completely. Wooden beams entwined with climbing vines, canopies that cast floral shadows, carpets rolled out over polished stone. It's not a house, not a garden. It's a threshold, a zone where inside and outside stop pretending they're different. This is where you'd sip something spiced and cold, where poetry would be recited slowly as if each syllable carried weight, where the wind is just enough to make you close your eyes but never enough to disturb your tea. You lie down briefly. The stone floor is warm beneath you. The air above you cools your cheeks. You feel like a loaf of bread halfway through baking. And then, a sound. Not a voice, not footsteps, just a faint whistle from the top of the badger where the wind slips past an old ceramic edge. A wind chime, a flute, a breath. Whatever it is, it hums like the garden itself is dreaming. Before science gave us equations and climate control settings, the Persians gave us design. A logic of comfort built from bricks, vines, and the ability to listen to air. And you, still stretched out on that stone, begin to reel. Every part of this garden asks the wind for help. None of it demands, and in return the wind gives shade, scent, stillness. You sigh, and the air carries it away like a secret. You lift yourself from the stone floor and follow the faint sound of trickling water. Barely audible at first, but steady, like the soft ticking of a distant clock. It pulls you into the heart of the garden, where symmetry reigns and a calm kind of geometry guides your feet. 4 walkways, 4 quadrants, a central fountain like a punctuation mark in the middle of a whispered sentence. This is the Chahar Bagh, literally 4 gardens, a Persian layout so iconic that it echoes through centuries across continents and even into modern landscape architecture. But here now, in the late warmth of the afternoon, it doesn't feel like a blueprint. It feels like intention. You walk one path, notice how the breeze picks up as you round the corner. Turn another direction, softer, more still. Turn again, sense change, light shift. It's like walking through moods, and that's no accident. Each quadrant has its own micro-ecosystem. Some cooler, some warmer. Some with shade trees, others with water features, all connected, all controlled, not through force, but flow. Historians still argue whether the Chahar Bagh was purely symbolic, representing the Quranic paradise with 4 rivers of milk, honey, water, and wine, or whether it was practical genius masked in poetry. You feel like it might be both, because the layout isn't just spiritual or aesthetic, it's aerodynamic. The straight walkways act as wind corridors, When aligned with prevailing breezes, they guide airflow through the entire space. The open center helps redistribute that air in all directions. Add a water fountain and suddenly you're looking at a natural air conditioning system, 700 years before electricity. You pause beside a low canal that bisects one quadrant. The water is shallow and clear, barely rippling. But step close and you feel it, a thin veil of cooler air hovering above its surface. Evaporation, yes, but also movement. The canal acts like a cooling artery, channeling air that has passed over it into the adjacent beds. Even the paving stones were chosen with airflow in mind. Rougher textures near the center catch wind and slow it, making it swirl gently. Smooth stones near the outer edges allow gusts to travel freely and carry away heat. And no, you're not imagining that. It's physics, pre-physics. You sit on a small bench carved from pale stone, its surface cooled by the shade of a fig tree. From this vantage point, you can see all 4 quadrants at once. Each has a personality. One's bold, with tall cypress trees that crack the sky. Another's delicate, full of flowering shrubs and whispering herbs. A third scented like citrus. The fourth hums with bees. The central platform where you sit, it's no throne. It's a listening post. From here, a designer could observe how the wind moved, which corner needed more trees, which canal needed rerouting, which vine had grown too heavy. It wasn't a finished product. It was a living conversation. And here comes your fringe tidbit of the hour. Some sources suggest that royal garden designers, yes, that was a profession, were trained to walk barefoot through these spaces to feel temperature and wind gradients with their own skin. Their job wasn't to measure, but to know. You kick off your shoes in solidarity as your soles meet the stones you understand. One footstep is warm, the next cooler. A breeze curls around your ankle and brushes your knee. Even standing still, you feel movement. The garden breathes, and now so do you. The fourfold division also helps balance extreme. If one quadrant overheats, another compensates with denser shade or water flow. If a scent becomes overpowering in one corner, the breeze shifts it gently to another, diluting it. It's like living inside a self-adjusting orchestra. Every element tuned to avoid dominance. You move again, this time along a tree-lined path between 2 quadrants. Above, the branches form a tunnel, dappling the ground with shade. Below, thin stone channels carry runoff water, guiding it gently without disrupting airflow. Nothing here screams for attention. Everything invites it. At the far end, a small pavilion peeks out, just 2 stone walls open on the other sides. A square roof sits lightly on slender columns, casting a perfect patch of shade. It's not much, just enough to sit, sip, and maybe recite a line of poetry. So of course you do. It doesn't matter what you say. The garden listens, and the wind carries it briefly before it's swallowed by the sound of the fountain again. Which reminds you, why a fountain in the middle? Ah, yes, the great centerpiece. It does more than sparkle in the sun, it regulates. Wind passes over the falling water, picking up cool moisture and redistributing it. The droplets rise in plumes, then sink as the air around them condenses. This draws fresh air in from the sides, a cycle of quiet refreshment. A fountain isn't just a symbol of life. It makes life livable. You close your eyes and let the spray land on your face. It's not much, just enough to say, "You're welcome here." And just when you think it can't get smarter, you notice the subtle tilt of the whole garden. Yes, tilt. The Chahar Bagh often sits on a slight incline, just enough to allow water to flow naturally from one quadrant to the next, pulled by gravity and guided by intent. That tilt also affects wind. It nudges airflow diagonally, ensuring no pocket of hot air stays stagnant for long. You never even noticed the slope until now, and now you'll never not feel it. In a modern world where we drown in apps, algorithms, and HVAC units, you sit inside an ancient algorithm made of stone, scent, and silence. And it works. You lean back against the stone column of the little pavilion, letting your fingers trail along the grooves etched into its base. The markings aren't decorative. They're functional, carved with the quiet precision of someone who cared how water pooled during a dust storm or where the wind whistled loudest on summer afternoons. And that, of course, brings you to the real star of the Persian garden's secret design. The badger, the wind catcher. You might have seen one from afar and mistaken it for a tower or maybe some old-world chimney. But as you stroll out from the shade and look up, it becomes unmistakable. A vertical structure, tall and dignified with slits or openings near its top. Not flashy, just present, watching. These architectural marvels are essentially vertical nostrils for a building, except they don't breathe in air to survive. They breathe it in so you can. Each badger is oriented toward the prevailing wind. When air flows into it, it travels downward through internal shafts, sometimes over a pool of water or wet surface, and then into the living space below. Instant air conditioning, centuries before the term existed, and no plug required. Historians still argue whether the invention of the badger predates similar technologies in Egypt or India, or whether it emerged independently as a response to uniquely Persian environmental challenges. But one thing's clear. When it comes to passive cooling, these people were light years ahead of us. And here's the kicker. Some badgers didn't just catch wind, they expelled it too. On still days when outside air was hotter than inside, the structure worked in reverse, pulling warmer air out of the building via natural convection. It was like the garden itself knew when to inhale and when to exhale. You walk past a small stone platform with 4 corner columns and no roof. On it sits a glazed bowl filled with water. The air around it feels cooler and you realize it's part of the system. A water bowl used to calibrate and enhance airflow. The garden is a chessboard of clever pieces, each move calculated for comfort. And just like the fourfold layout, the wind catcher often wasn't alone. Gardens, and the palaces within them, sometimes had multiple towers, each tuned to different directions, altitudes, or tasks. The result, a breeze that wasn't random but curated. Of course, wind doesn't respect borders, and neither did these ideas. You pause to consider how the badger traveled, figuratively and literally, across space and time. From Yazd to Baghdad, Cairo to Hyderabad. Sometimes it changed names. Sometimes it changed shapes. But the core principle remained. Direct the wind and you master the mood. In more humid regions where wind needed to be dried, wind catchers were paired with colonnades, underground aqueducts. Cool air passed over colonnade water, got denser and sank naturally into rooms and courtyards. You picture it, a chain reaction of chill spreading through walls and minds alike. And here's a fringe tidbit for your trouble. Some older palaces employed wind catchers as listening devices. The shafts acted like giant ears, transmitting sound from the courtyard below into private chambers. So yes, if you ever feel like your room is judging you, maybe it is. You reach another small seating area. This one's lower, sunken into the ground by a foot or so. And as you descend, you notice a sharp temperature drop. Cool air pools here, protected from both sunlight and escape. You're sitting in a temperature trap by design. Someone once understood that heat rises and cool air sinks. Not metaphorically, physically. So they carved a space for that coolness to rest. Just enough depth to turn a brutal summer noon into a bearable sigh. You lay your palms flat on the stones, noticing how some blocks feel colder than others. Not random. The darker ones absorb more heat. The lighter ones reflect it. Some blocks are even porous, able to hold moisture and release it slowly. You aren't walking on a path. You're walking on a passive climate control system. And then there's the way the plants themselves are arranged. The taller trees line the outer perimeter of the garden. Their job isn't just to give shade, it's to block wind shear. High-speed air hitting a naked courtyard is chaotic and loud, but filtered through palm leaves or cypress fronds. It softens, curls, flows. Beneath those trees, mid-level shrubs hold cooler air near the surface. Closer to the walkways, herbs and ground cover keep the soil shaded, reducing evaporation and even scenting the air. It's not just pretty, it's strategy. You take in a deep breath, lavender, mint, a whisper of damp stone and warm fig. Your body recognizes the mixture and settles a little deeper. Now imagine doing this every day. You're not royalty, but you're a craftsman or cook. You walk through this garden not to be amazed, but to get to work. Yet along the way, you're soothed. You cool down. Your thoughts slow. That was the real brilliance. The technology wasn't loud or visible. It didn't announce itself. It worked quietly, folded into daily life like sugar into tea. You never noticed it until it was gone. You remember a phrase from earlier. One footstep warmer, the next cooler. Here, that still holds true. Every inch of this place is a lesson. Every breeze a tutor. And the more you walk it, the more fluent you become in the language of wind. The Persians didn't fight the climate. They enlisted it, harnessed it, built for it instead of against it, which may explain why centuries later we're still playing catch-up with their elegance. You look back at the Badger one last time, standing tall against the sky. Not a tower, not a relic, a teacher, still catching the wind, still whispering cool truths into warm ears. You wander farther into the garden, where the paths twist a little more freely and the wind no longer feels like a happy accident. It feels curated, like a whisper being passed from tree to tree, stone to stone. And you start to notice something else, the sound. It's not silence exactly, it's absence. The absence of harshness, of echoes, of hot, brittle noise. The garden doesn't just move air, it mutes the world beyond its walls. You're standing in what seems like the most ordinary space, a rectangular courtyard with low benches and a modest fountain in the center. But as you pause, the air shifts again. A breeze drifts through one side, circles the fountain like it's casing the perimeter, and leaves out another. Not rushed, not bored, like it has a purpose. It's here you learn about another tool in the Persian garden's arsenal: acoustic cooling. You smile a little at the name. It sounds like a lo-fi jazz album. But the science is real. The way water trickles, the shape of the pools, and even the echoes of footsteps all combine to change how you feel the temperature. Historians still argue whether these sonic effects were deliberate innovations or happy accidents. But either way, the result is something ancient yet oddly modern. Environmental psychology. The design makes you feel cool even if the thermometer would disagree, and sometimes that's enough. A woman once wrote about this. Not recently, centuries ago, she lived in the palace, and her letters speak of afternoon walks through the citrus groves where the air hummed as if the sky breathed through a flute. You don't know her name. No one does. But you feel like you've met her right here. You stroll toward a shady corner where the garden's edge meets the outer wall. Embedded in the wall is a little niche, no bigger than a pillow, and inside it sits a small ceramic jug. It's cool to the touch. You pick it up and instantly feel a drop in temperature. Evaporative cooling. Water seeps through the porous ceramic, evaporates from the surface, and takes heat with it. It's not flashy, but it works. It always worked. And someone, some designer long gone, built this niche at the perfect height and orientation to catch the prevailing breeze. So even a simple jug could become a tiny air conditioner. As you return the jug, your gaze shifts downward. The ground is paved with alternating bands of stone and baked brick, not for style, for function. The materials absorb and release heat at different rates, creating microcurrents of warm and cool air as the day passes. It's like the floor is breathing in slow rhythm with the sky. You take a few steps and stop near a narrow channel cut into the ground. It's dry now, but clearly made to carry water, probably from a nearby qanat. What's interesting is how it curves slightly, just enough to make the wind veer with it. In these gardens, water wasn't just decoration, it was direction. It guided air, invited it, tamed it, and when needed, it carried it away. Like a conversation that knows when to pause. You move toward a different part of the garden, this one newer, more restored. There's a sense of careful imitation here. It's been rebuilt from blueprints and guesswork, probably by people who respected the past, but didn't always understand it. Still, it tries. A replica of a badger stands nearby, clean and painted, but not quite humming like the old ones. You climb a small set of stairs and peer inside. There's no airflow, no scent. It's sterile. That's the thing. The genius of Persian design wasn't just in the structure. It was in the placement, the timing, the integration. The new tower stands, but it doesn't breathe. It's a chest with no lung. You head back to the older quarter where plants grow a little wilder and stone paths have softened with time. There, tucked between two jasmine bushes, you find something strange. A hole in the wall, rectangular, shallow, and covered by a grated screen of wood and clay. You crouch down and feel the wind, cool, steady, gentle. It's a subterranean vent leading to a kanat tunnel. Air travels underground for long distances, chilling as it goes, then exits in places like this. The screen doesn't just protect it, it diffuses it, lets the breeze trickle in like a secret. You stay there a moment, listening, feeling. The breeze smells faintly of earth and mint. Somewhere deeper in the system, maybe there's a bend or a water basin. The coolness is more than just temperature. It's a memory of rocks and roots and water that hasn't seen the sun for weeks. You stand slowly. The garden rustles. A leaf falls. The wind lifts it once, then drops it again, as if to say, this is the rhythm. Not the mechanical pulse of machines, but the ancient sway of sun and soil and intention. You walk on, lighter now. Your skin is cooler. Your breath is deeper. You haven't just observed the Persian wind system. You've entered it. You continue down a tree-lined path where the light dapples gently across your arms, and the wind, ever your quiet companion, plays with the folds of your sleeve. By now, you know better than to believe this breeze is accidental. It's not just blowing. It's been invited, shaped, and honored. And here's where the garden becomes something more than clever engineering. It becomes philosophy. In Persian culture, wind wasn't just a weather pattern. It was a force imbued with meaning. Breath, spirit, renewal. The very word bad in Persian carries poetic weight. Wind connects heaven to earth, desert to oasis, soul to skin. In Zoroastrianism, one of Persia's most ancient religions, the four elements, earth, water, fire, and wind, weren't just building blocks, they were sacred presences. And among them, wind was the messenger. So when a garden designer plotted the placement of a wall or a tree or a channel of water, they weren't just being practical. They were honoring a cosmic force, creating harmony between space and spirit. You pass under an archway carved with faded script. The words are mostly worn away, but one phrase remains legible. To rest in the path of the wind is to rest in the mercy of the world. You stand there for a moment just to test it, and sure enough, the wind passes through, and circles you like a curious cat. Mercy indeed. Historians still argue whether this design philosophy was always so spiritual, or whether the spiritual just became a way to explain the scientific. But in these gardens, the line blurs. Maybe it always does. You notice how certain elements appear repeatedly, small open courtyards, deliberate asymmetry in the placement of shrubs, staggered levels of elevation. You thought they were aesthetic quirks, but now you recognize them as principles. Ancient thermodynamics in disguise, and yet, even beyond science and spirit, there's a cultural message being whispered by every brick and breeze. Balance, not dominance, not control. These gardens didn't force wind to serve. They invited it to participate. You remember a story told by a visiting European traveler, probably 18th century, definitely sunburned, who described the Persian gardens as the only place on earth where nature obeys man with a smile. He missed the point. These gardens weren't about making nature obey. They were about learning how to ask nicely. You lean against a low wall topped with ceramic tiles, each one hand-painted, each slightly different, none shouting for attention. That's the other thing. This garden doesn't brag. It doesn't need to. You look down and realize the wall itself is vented. Slits run along the lower edge, almost invisible from a distance. You crouch and place your hand near them. A cool draft greets you. It's not strong, not showy, but it's there doing its job without fanfare. It reminds you of the old bakers in desert towns who built their ovens with one side facing the wind. Not to fan the flames, but to draw away smoke. A garden like an oven needs ventilation, but also patience. You can't rush air, you can only tempt it. You wander toward a shaded alcove and find a small book resting on a stone ledge. It's leather-bound, sun-faded, and written in Persian. You can't read it, but you open it anyway. The pages are filled with diagrams, geometric patterns, wind diagrams, tree placements. There are notes in the margins. One sketch shows a badger connected to a curved corridor labeled Silent Path. It hits you. This wasn't just a garden, it was a learning tool, a place where designers practiced and perfected the art of air. The very ground beneath you is a classroom for those who paid attention. You lean your head back against the warm stoop. A pomegranate blossom drifts down and lands on your shoulder. You don't brush it away. Everything here is meant to land somewhere. The breeze thickens for a moment as if carrying a story too long unsaid. You close your eyes and imagine the original builders, mathematicians in robes, architects with ink-stained fingers, poets who sketched their dreams in dirt before laying the first tile. Did they ever think someone like you would be wandering through centuries later, trying to read their intentions through the rustle of fig leaves? You open your eyes again. The wind has shifted. Softer now, like it's waiting for your next step. You round the corner of a hedged corridor just in time to see two boys sprinting past a low fountain, laughing, their robes flapping behind them like sails catching wind. You smile, because even play in this place obeys the garden's ancient instructions. But now you're heading toward a quieter corner and the air changes again. You're near the royal pavilion. This isn't just a pretty patch of trees and flowers. It's a statement. A wind-powered, status-coded, landscape-level flex. Here, the architecture of air takes on a whole new dimension. Because while Persian garden designers were masters of climate, they were also masters of politics. And wind in their hands wasn't just a comfort, it was a message. Picture it. A visiting ambassador from a dusty city far to the west arrives in midsummer. He's dripping in sweat, cheeks red, robe sticking like a wet curtain. But then he's led through a marble gate, under a lattice of carved wood, into the royal garden. And suddenly, it's cool. A soft breeze rises from the floor itself, as if the ground were breathing kindness. The air smells like lemons and crushed mint. The sunlight filters through grape leaves above. He thinks, is this magic? No, it's influence. It's control disguised as generosity, and it works. You walk past a wide colonnade now, where the paving stones have fine cracks, just wide enough to vent cool air from underground tunnels. Above you, a wind catcher funnels the breeze, but only toward the throne side of the garden. You see it now. The symmetry breaks subtly. Everything here is tilted in one direction, toward the seat of power. Historians still argue whether this was intentional symbolism or just functional elegance. But when the king's side is cooler, brighter, breezier, and yours is not, you feel the hierarchy without a word spoken. You duck under a low arbor of vines and step into a side chamber. The air here is perfectly still, almost oppressive, a deliberate absence. It's the reverse of the throne space, and you can imagine how a rival guest might be led here. Not out of cruelty, but to send a message. Even the wind knows who's in charge, and yet, it's not only about superiority. Sometimes the airflow equalized. In grand banquets held under open canopies, the layout ensured that wind passed across all cushions equally. Because offending a noble with sweat stains was not ideal diplomacy. Balance mattered too, especially when you had to keep 10 different viziers happy while also keeping their turbans unruffled. You pass a mosaic tile set into the path. It shows a bird with spread wings, soaring over a geometric garden. Wind stylized as loops and ribbons curling from its feathers. Not subtle. You imagine the discussions that happened here. Courtiers arguing about irrigation, nobles negotiating dowries while sipping rosewater. And all the while, the garden ensured no one got too hot under the collar, literally. You duck into a narrow passage between the outer walls and the central grove. Here, the airflow changes again. It's channeled, compressed and quickened. You press your back to the wall and feel it rushing by. A kind of wind-whisper tunnel. Private air for private people. It's no coincidence that some royal messages were delivered in these corridors. The sound of footsteps masked by rustling trees. Voices muffled by babbling fountains. Even the wind conspired to protect secrets. You remember hearing that in some Persian courts, the position of one's seat in the garden, windward or leeward, could determine what gossip you were meant to overhear. Nothing in these spaces was left to chance, not even eavesdropping. A cat brushes against your ankle, startling you. It stares, unblinking, before vanishing into a hedge. It seems to know these paths better than you ever will, and now you see it. How the invisible becomes visible here. The air isn't just something you breathe, it's a plot device, a performer. A political agent in flowing form. You walk to the edge of a raised terrace, the view opening wide before you. The garden stretches out like a quilt of patterns and color, each quadrant slightly different, each corner deliberately sloped. And you know with sudden clarity that someone once stood right here and asked the wind, "What story do I want to tell today?" Then they built the answer in bricks. The sun is high now, and your steps begin to slow. Not out of exhaustion, but reverence. You've reached the hour when the Persian garden does something remarkable. It becomes almost completely still. No birds calling, no children shouting, just a gentle hush that feels intentional. You step into a long colonnade flanked by olive trees and cooling pools. The air is thick with quiet, not dead, not stale, just perfectly weighted. The kind of silence that seems to know what you need better than you do. You exhale and even your breath seems reluctant to break the calm. In these gardens, stillness is not an accident. It's a feature, a late morning gift for those wise enough to slow down. The ancients knew something modern people often forget. Sometimes the best airflow is no airflow at all, especially when the goal is not cooling, but contemplation. You pass a cluster of date palms, each spaced just wide enough to break direct sun, but close enough to let shadows overlap. You walk under this soft canopy of light and dark, and the world feels layered, like being inside a prayer. Historians still argue whether this midday silence was a result of spiritual rhythm, climate strategy, or simple coincidence. But in this moment, you don't care. It works. A thin breeze tugs at your sleeve, barely perceptible. Not enough to cool your body, but just enough to anchor your thoughts. It moves like a monk, pacing in slow circles, unhurried, unbothered. The walls around this part of the garden rise a little higher. It feels more enclosed, more sacred. You notice the sound of water again, not rushing, not splashing, but trickling down a narrow channel lined with blue glazed tiles. The sound barely registers above the whisper of wind through reeds. Yet it draws you in like a whispered secret. And here's the hidden genius. This part of the garden amplifies calm. While earlier sections focused on redirecting or encouraging wind, this one manages its absence. There are corners that block the breeze just enough to create microclimates. Spots for thinkers, poets, lovers maybe. You rest on a marble bench set under a trellis of grapevines. A single leaf flutters down and lands on your lap. No fanfare, just a quiet reminder that life continues even when it slows. A gardener walks past, barefoot and humming. He carries nothing but a clay jug. As he passes under the archway, you notice that he pauses just briefly in a pocket of windless warmth. He smiles, eyes closed, then continues. You realize even he knows these rhythms, he lives by them. You begin to see these quiet spots like hidden rooms in a house made of light and breath. You sit in one now, watching the patterns of shadow change shape as the sun drifts overhead. A dragonfly hovers, then darts away, as if tugged by invisible strings. Some scholars suggest this part of the garden was meant for prayer or reflection, a kind of natural mosque where the architecture of air supports stillness of spirit. Others think it was simply a practical way to escape midday heat. But the lines between function and faith blur easily here. And maybe that's the point. Maybe Persian designers didn't separate comfort from meaning. Maybe every curve and corner was a quiet lesson. Stillness can be a gift. You close your eyes and just breathe. No fans, no machines, just the gentle choreography of shade, space, and silence. It's easy to miss this section if you're rushing. There are no fountains to dazzle, no wind catchers to admire. But in some ways, this is the core of the garden. The pause between the notes, the breath before the next decision. You stretch your legs and rise. As you step into a shaft of sunlight, the silence fades just a little. A single gust finds you again, slipping around a pillar, brushing your cheek. The garden exhales. You follow the gust as it disappears into a path lined with cypress trees. Their tall, narrow trunks stand like quiet sentinels, casting long shadows that slice the sunlight into ribbons. Ahead, a student walks backward, sketchbook in hand, attempting to map the air. You smile. Even now, people still try to trap wind with pencils. You keep walking and the garden shifts again. Not just in smell or texture, but in logic. This part feels different, more angular, like someone handed a blueprint to a poet and said, "Make it breathe." And here's where it gets strange. Everything you've been sensing, the clever vents, the buried water, the perfect geometry, is beginning to feel eerily modern. Like maybe your HVAC technician read Persian gardening manuals on the weekend. The wind catchers loom in the distance, their silhouettes cutting into the sky like minarets with ambition. You spot one just ahead, attached to what looks like a summer pavilion. It's tall, hollow, slatted with vented wood, like a chimney designed not to expel but to receive. You step beneath it, and there it is, that sudden drop in temperature. As if the air has remembered how to be kind. It slides down the chimney, curves along the ceiling, and wraps you in a soft whisper of cool. This is no accident. This is physics in fabric form, architecture playing the flute. Historians still argue whether wind catchers were discovered by trial and error or developed from older Mesopotamian experiments. But they agree on this. They work. And they worked centuries before fluid dynamics got a name. You glance up and try to understand how something so simple, an open box on a roof, could outperform your living room's vent system. But that's the magic. The Persian builders weren't guessing. They understood pressure, vacuum, convection, not through equations but observation. One quirky theory claims that early wind catchers were modeled after falcon wings, engineered to grab air like a bird dives for prey. There's no hard proof, but it wouldn't surprise you. Everything here seems to learn from nature, not just copy it. You sit on a ledge and watch the breeze swirl dust into patterns. Not random, not chaotic, just unhurried motion guided by invisible hands. And this is when it hits you. The science of this place wasn't always called science. It was called survival, comfort, beauty. It was what you knew by heart because your skin told you. A school group passes by, chattering in 3 languages. Their guide points to a miniature model of the garden, explaining how the orientation of each wind catcher was calculated to match seasonal wind flow. One kid raises his hand and asks why modern houses don't have them. The guide shrugs. "We forgot," she says. You walk toward a narrow corridor flanked by high stone walls. No trees here, just angled slits that direct breeze through like whispers through teeth. You test each corner like tasting the air. One spot is warm, the next cool as a clay pot in shade. In that moment, you wonder how many modern engineers would admit defeat here. How many would try to install a fan instead of trusting silence and shape. Some scholars believe that Persian engineers even adjusted airflow over time by altering surface textures, changing tile finishes, planting new bushes, shifting stones. It wasn't about creating a perfect system and locking it in. It was about listening to what the air wanted to do. That kind of humility is rare in design. You circle back to a shaded bench under a trellis, sipping warm tea from a brass cup left by someone else. It tastes like mint and metal. You sigh. Not everything needs a manual. Somewhere nearby, a teenager argues with her brother about whether the tower above them is a chimney or a decoration. You want to tell them it's both. That's the point. In Persian gardens, every flourish hides a function, and every function has style. You remember the student with the sketchbook. Maybe he's still back there trying to make the air stand still long enough to be drawn. Good luck. The Persians never tried to stop the wind, they just made it dance. And here you are in a courtyard that has no vents, no visible towers, yet somehow feels 20 degrees cooler than the road you came from. You realize now, even the empty spaces are doing work. Air flows where it's invited, not where it's forced. Modern science will catch up eventually. In fact, it already has. Thermodynamics, passive cooling, fluid mechanics, all the words we use to sound clever were once just things people noticed by standing still on a hot day. You stand now. Let the air pass through your sleeve, across your back, into your hair. No wires, no switches, just wind and wisdom. And for a brief, glowing second you think, maybe we didn't invent anything. Maybe we're just remembering. You turn down a final path, slower now, because everything feels earned. Every breeze, every patch of light, every echo under the canopy. This is the garden's last lesson. Not a showy finale, but a kind of quiet bow. A curtain call of air and architecture. You step into an open plaza, octagonal in shape, its edges lined with soft ceramic tiles that glimmer like shallow water even when dry. The space feels ceremonial but not grandiose. You're not sure if you've wandered into the garden's center or its edge. And that's the trick. It doesn't matter. In a Persian garden, there's no front or back, only harmony. A domed structure rises on the far side, not large but precise. Underneath, a pool reflects the sky, crisp and unbothered. The surface is smooth until a ripple skims across it, barely a shiver. You glance up and spot it, a wind catcher cleverly hidden behind a stone lattice. Still working, still teaching. You sit by the water's edge. A child nearby dips their fingers in, then giggles as a gust licks their face. It's as if the garden approved of their mischief. And suddenly the wind feels personal. Not just a draft, not just a technical success, but something alive. Persians once wrote poems to the wind, called it the messenger of love, the voice of longing, the sigh of distant friends. Standing here, you get it. Historians still argue whether Persian designers truly intended for their gardens to be read like poetry, or if we just impose that view today because we crave meaning. But as you watch a dove swoop through the arches, ride a current and vanish again, you stop caring. Meaning has a way of arriving without permission. A fringe theory suggests that certain garden layouts aligned with star patterns or seasonal solstices, creating not just airflow but resonance, a sonic design tuned to cosmic forces. Wild? Sure, but you're surrounded by wind that behaves like memory, so why not? You press your palm to the stone beside the pool, warm but not hot. Somewhere, buried pipes may still be guiding water just beneath your hand, feeding fountains you can't see. Air is moving through the earth too, in ways you'll never fully grasp. And yet you benefit. That's faith in a way. The child by the water finds a reed and begins to blow through it, sending squeaky notes into the air. An improvised flute. Their parent claps softly. It's a performance, and the wind is part of the audience. You think back to earlier, the silence, the channels, the long corridors of engineered breeze, and you realize this garden isn't a series of tricks. It's a conversation with the land, the heat, the people. It listens, it responds, and when needed, it says nothing at all. You make your way back along the tiled path, passing old walls etched with script. Quotes from Rumi maybe, or lines lost to time. You can't read them. But the shape of the words feels like wind too, curved, flowing, looping. Your last steps bring you under an archway where a final draft curls around your ankles like a silk scarf. It leaves nothing undone. Stillness returns. The garden exhales, and so do you. Now the breeze is gone, but its memory lingers. You're sitting still, body warm from walking, mind cooled by quiet. The garden has folded itself up like origami, each corridor and corner gently tucking away into dusk. No more discoveries, just peace. The sun is lower now, and everything leans into amber. The shadows have stretched so far they barely seem like shadows anymore, more like soft blankets laid over stone and soil. You imagine lying on one, letting it wrap you in its hush. There's no rush to leave. The garden doesn't close, it just fades. In the distance you hear a bird, not calling, just shifting on a branch. Maybe it too has learned to wait for the next breath. You lie down now, perhaps under a vine on a cushion or a smooth patch of stone. It doesn't matter. You're not here to be entertained anymore. You're here to rest exactly as the garden intended. Each breeze that moved through you today, each clever shift of pressure, each hush of still air, has left behind a version of calm that doesn't need to be explained. It only needs to be felt. And now, as sleep tiptoes closer, you can let go of the logic, the history, even the science. Just keep the rhythm. Inhale, pause, exhale. Somewhere a wind catcher turns softly in the night.